Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is going to be the first video in a series of videos where I try to answer basically any question you could have about remote observing, from what goes into a remote telescope to how do you shoot with a remote telescope, how do you edit data from a remote telescope. All of these different subtleties I'm going to try to describe for you all to help get you all into remote observing. Now this video is going to be about what goes into a remote telescope. How can you prepare yourself? How do you know what you need? What should you not get? What should you get? We're going to answer all of those questions, as well as for those of you who may not know anything about remote observing, I'll show you what it entails. So right now we're actually inside of a remote observatory. This is building number 3 here at Starfront Observatories, and essentially a remote observatory is a place where you can host a astrophotography setup. And every clear night, the roof will roll open, and then you can remotely log into your astrophotography setup to do astronomy from a dark sky location when it's clear. And this has a ton of different advantages over doing it from your backyard. You get more clear skies, it's in a darker location, and you'll just get better photographs and have the option to photograph a lot cooler objects than you would from somewhere that may be not so ideal. You also get the benefit of having security over your setup. It's always in a place that's good. You don't have to deal with, setting it up every single night. So there's a whole litany of benefits, but I don't want to get too carried away from the point. So that's what a remote observatory is. Now, in order to have a system that works at a remote observatory, you need to have kind of a bedrock foundation of knowledge in astrophotography to know, how to shoot or what to get. And for many of you, you may not even know anything about astrophotography at all. And if you're coming to this video in that context, I would suggest checking out a lot of the other videos that are here on YouTube, those from the likes of Astro Backyard or nebulaphotos.com, Queeve. There's a whole bunch of great channels that will describe, from the utmost basic setups, how you can actually get into doing astrophotography and just understanding it from more of that standpoint. From this video and from this guide, we'll kind of be jumping off from a bit more of assuming you have that knowledge, because remote astrophotography is kind of like one layer of complexity above backyard or traditional observing for most people. But that being said, there is about 9 or 10 different components in a remote telescope, and we're just going to go through each of them. We're going to talk about how they play into a remote astrophotography setup. All right, so just like the first part of your home photography setup might be your tripod, at a remote observatory, you don't have a tripod, you have a pier. And the pier is not something that you need to worry about, at least at our remote observatory, because we supply this for you. Now the pier is the thing which your setup sits on, and from where you'll be permanently installed and doing all of your astrophotography. Our piers range in different sizes and diameters depending on the size and weight of the telescope. But in general, it's these steel tubes with these gussets at the bottom to support rigidity, and they're all concrete anchored into the floor, and they aren't going anywhere. With these 4 concrete anchors, you could probably drive a car into these things and you would probably hurt your car more than you would hurt the pier. So that is how they are all laid out. Now, with the pier, what also gets supplied, at least at our observatory, is you get a 120 volts AC connection and an Ethernet inline to provide you your internet and power at each pier. And you can see we already have these starting to get laid out at every single pier. We've got Ethernet cables, and these will all get laid with AC cables as well. So your setup is going to get hardwired directly to internet and hardwired directly into power. So you don't need to worry about batteries, you don't need to worry about internet, and you don't need to worry about tripods. All of that stuff in your setup is taken care of. So that is the base of your setup. So probably the biggest differentiator between a remote capable setup and one that you use in your backyard is your ability to negotiate with troubleshooting your setup at a distance without manual intervention. Now, the most common way you can do this troubleshooting is by power cycling any kind of device you have. But how do you actually do this power cycling when you're not there in person with your telescope? Now, there's two ways that one could go about doing this at a remote observatory. One of them is this. This is a CASA or TP-Link web power switch outlet. And this you can use in conjunction with an app on your phone to do power cycling to all of your devices that use the 120 volts AC. So let's say, oh, your PC is not working. You just log into your phone app, turn it on, turn it off, and then you're back to the races. And you can do that with any of your devices powered in such a way. This is the most simple and easy way to get into that kind of power cycling. There is one other option, which I'll show you now. All right, this is the other possibility apart from the CASA or the TP-Link. This is the digital loggers remotely powerable switch. And it is a lot more complicated to set up. And not only do you need the digital loggers to make this work, but you also need an Ethernet switch, which would be something like this on the side here. This is just a dumb Ethernet switch. And the reason you need an Ethernet switch to use the digital loggers is because both of them utilize an Ethernet cable. And since we only supply you one Ethernet, you're going to need a dumb switch to kind of act as a Ethernet hub between your digital loggers and your computer. So if you're going to go this route, you need to be aware of that complexity. But both of these solutions allow you to do the power cycling to the devices on your setup, at least when it comes to AC power. But let's say you maybe aren't running your camera or your other astrophotography equipment direct to AC. There are a number of other ways that you can do this power cycling, one of which is right here actually. You could use something like the Pegasus Power Box, which will let you power cycle any of your 12 volt devices just through a computer program while you're remoted in. So this can be handy if you have your system cable managed a little bit differently. I like the Pegasus quite a bit, and I have those on my setups, but there's also the Wanderer Astro Power Box. Similar deal. It just lets you turn on and off those devices, and it also gives you a USB hub. The other really important thing you need to think about when you're looking at a remote setup is how are you actually going to control it? Like, what is the computer that you're going to use? There's a ton of different types of computers. There's laptops, tower desktops, mini PCs, Eagle computers in general. People either use mini PCs for the most part, or they'll use an ASI Air. I'm not going to discuss the ASI Air too much in depth in this video. Getting it set up is a whole other consideration on its own. But the ASI Air is a possibility for remote. But when you're looking at PCs, we recommend for most people to use a B-Link mini PC. And I'll go ahead and link the models that we like in the description of this video. We have found these particular computers to be the most stable long-term, and they work the best for us in a remote setting. Reason being is they have good longevity, and compared to other common astrophotography computers, they do better. The other frequent one you'll see in astrophotography setups that many of you may own is the Melee Quieter mini PC. And we have many of them on site here, but they run really, really, really hot. And it's probably not going to be ideal to run a super hot computer at an observatory like that. You'd probably want something a little more rugged. And so we enjoy the B-Links. But any kind of Windows computer solution will work as long as you have the cables to reach it. Probably the biggest concern if you're thinking about doing remote observing is whether or not you have a mount that is good enough for doing remote observing. And what is actually going to function. Do I need a premium mount? Do I need a homing mount? It's not super clear to a lot of people what actually works. And now that we've installed and supported over 200 telescopes now, we have a fairly good idea of what is going to work well for you. So broadly speaking, there's two categories of mounts. Most people, 99%, are going to do equatorial. So I'm not going to get into the whole alt-az or equatorial discussion, but what I will get into is the homing versus non-homing discussion. Now this is mounts that are able to return themselves back to a known position every single time, even after a power cycling. That is what the ability to home is. A non-homing mount, you could move it around, turn the power on and off, reconnect it in software, and it's going to believe that it's in the wrong place. And what a lot of people worry about in their minds is a homing mount going to work, or is a non-homing mount going to work? What do I actually need? And the answer is both of them do function, but a non-homing mount will require a bit more diligence on your end to operate. And what can really help in this is having a pier camera, which is like a small ZWO planetary camera, which we attach to a pier. That lets you just keep eyes on your mount to know where it is. As long as you can see and know where your mount is, you don't really need that homing feature. But if you can't see your mount at all, then having the homing feature is a bit of a safer idea for your telescope equipment. That is what you really need to be thinking about when you think about your setups. The other broad two categories are premium mounts versus non-premium mounts. And I would say that for 99% of you, if you have a wide field refractor, even going up to like an 11-inch SCT, you really don't need to be buying a premium mount. Any kind of premium mounts with a low weight cap, like this, the GM1000 HPS, the Mach 2, the Paramount Mighty, any of these mounts, you won't really have a reason to buy them if you're auto guiding and if you're just using a typical astrophotography setup going up to about, an 11-inch SCT. You simply don't need the performance they offer, and you don't need the weight capacity that they offer either. Once you start getting into larger systems, things like a CDK14, a CDK17, then looking at the premium mounts, to me, becomes a worthy discussion. So considering that, what would be a good spend for a mount? What mounts do well here at our observatories? For the most part, we see really good success with people using ZWO mounts, AM3, AM5, AM5N. We have well over 100 of them here, and none of them have ever given us issues. They've been great. We also really like the Ioptron CEM70, the GEM45. Both of those models of Ioptron mounts have not given us any issues either. For larger mounts, if you do want something with more weight capacity and maybe you did want a premium mount, we prefer the Astrophysics and the 10 micron mounts over software bisque. Those have all done super well for us. No issues on the AP or the 10 micron front. So yeah, those are the things I would think about for mounts. If you have something like an EQ6R, we have probably over 20 EQ6Rs here on site. They do great. I would just get a pier camera for it, and then I'd say you're golden. You just want to make sure you know where your mount is. And once you kind of get the hang of it, they'll be consistent to use. Some mounts that are not great, the Celestron AVX, the Celestron CGXL, anything controlled by CWPI from Celestron is not going to be very good to run. Some of the other Skywatcher mounts like the EQ8 have been good for us. CQ350 I'm not so much of a fan of, but the EQ8's been good. But yeah, that basically covers most of the mounts that we'll see out here. And I'll tour a bunch of setups with you all in a moment once I'm done talking about all the components, just so you get a good idea. The other really important component to a remote telescope setup is the telescope itself. This, for example, is a little 75mm refractor. The great thing about remote telescopes is that basically any telescope you get is going to work. Basically any telescope you could get can do really amazing things, all the way from a little red cat all the way up to a big CDK. They all can do unique things that one type of telescope can do that the other might not be able to. So there's no reason to think, oh, I only have a little telescope, I can't do very much from a remote observatory. That's not true. There's a lot of really, really cool wide field objects that you really couldn't do travel shooting or from a light polluted backyard. What you need to think about when you're getting a remote telescope is probably what is my best telescope, because you want your best telescope under your darkest skies. And usually your best telescope is going to be your fastest telescope with the best support for a larger image circle. But whatever telescope you have, whatever your best one is going to be the best one to have at a remote observatory, because you want your best instrument operating under the best skies to get the best images. It just makes the most sense. But here at our observatory, we have literally every kind of telescope, maybe not literally, but we've got CDKs, we've got Ritchie-Creations, Petzval refractors, triplet refractors, SCTs, Newtonians, Maxitov Newtonians, hyperbolic Newtonians. We have a very good diversity of telescopes here, and the beauty is that they all work. It's really just, what is your goal to shoot? Do you want to do wide field? Do you want to do galaxies? And what do you already have? And what's going to get you to that goal result faster? But there isn't any particular thing that makes one scope better for remote versus another. So whatever you have, if you take good photos with it at home, it's going to do good out here. An absolute must-have for your remote telescope is a way to do autofocusing. There's not going to be anyone on the observatory floor to focus your telescope for you, not even me. So you're going to need some kind of way to remotely turn the knob on your telescope so that you can focus it throughout the night. And there are a whole bunch of different brands, a whole bunch of different options. It can be kind of overwhelming to decide what to get. The most common autofocuser we have here at the observatory that does well is the ZWO EAF. Here on my telescope system, I've got two of them, as you can see, one for a camera lens and then one for this Takahashi. And they both work really well for me. But that being said, there's, depending on your scope and what you have, you may have a whole bunch of other options, like a Moonlight Nightcrawler, a Prima Luce Asato, Pegasus Focus Cube, etc., etc. There's a billion different options. If you have a common amateur setup, you don't already have an autofocuser and you're just thinking about which one should I get, you should be getting the ZWO EAF just because software-wise, and mechanical-wise, it is the most stable one to mount to a scope, and it's the most stable one to operate software-wise as well. We've had plenty of issues with other focusers, ones like the Prima Luce autofocusers, the ones that go over your knob, as well as the Pegasus Focus Cube. I would say don't get those, just get a ZWO EAF. It's going to work well for you, as it has for, well over probably 150 people at this observatory. If you're looking for something like a little more custom, you could also replace the entire focuser assembly on your whole telescope as another option. Now, if you're looking to do that, you're probably getting something a bit more expensive, in which case, there's a whole bunch of options. The ones from Optech are really good. Moonlights are really great. Some of the larger Prima Luce focusers work okay. Whatever works for your telescope, whatever you test locally and works consistently for you, I would go with that. But again, if you're buying new and looking to replace a bunch of stuff, Optech focuser is really nice. Moonlight Nightcrawler is really nice. And yeah, those are the ones that I would suggest. But no matter what, you will need some kind of autofocuser because you have to be able to focus. Okay, next up we got cameras. Now cameras are of course going to be the thing that actually, takes your photos for you. So it's very important to have one for remote observing, even backyard observing. There's two different options. You can go monochrome or you can go one-shot color with your system. Both have their time and their place for depending on what your goal is. One can be better than the other. It really just depends on what your goal is. In terms of making the most use of time for deep sky astro and producing the best single shot images for deep sky astro, monochrome is going to be your best friend, because it allows you to do narrowband and it gets you extra resolution. Of course, with monochrome, you also need something like a filter wheel, like what I have here on these cameras, that lets you select the different filters that you want to use. One-shot color can also be good though, if you're trying to shoot things that move quickly, like a comet, or if you're trying to shoot things that, depend on gradients changing quickly over time, like if you're trying to do big Milky Way mosaics, a one-shot color will let you do it better and faster. So it all depends on what you want to do, but we see success in both types, one shot or mono. The one thing I will say is that you definitely want a dedicated astronomy camera if you're going to be doing remote, and you want something that has active cooling. So like these 2600 MC Duo or the 6200 MM Pro, both of these cameras have fans on them that let you set the sensor's temperature to a consistent level. And this is going to let you consistently calibrate your data, and it's going to give you way cleaner images, especially on those hot summer nights. So I'd say it's very, very necessary to have a camera that can at least cool itself down. Now again, there's a ton of different options from different camera brands. The most successful cameras at our observatory so far have been ZWO cameras for most of them have functioned really well. Player one cameras have also done very well. So if you're kind of in the, lower end to mid-tier budget range, ZWO or Player One are probably going to be your best choices for hardware and software stability. If you're looking for more premium stuff, then the Moravian Instruments cameras are really, really nice. We have a couple of them here at the observatory now, and they're very nice cameras. So those are the ones that I would look at if I were looking at what to get. If you have a camera that works for you already, it'll work out here. So most telescopes at our observatory are going to need some way to auto-guide. This is basically tracking a star for the duration of an exposure, just to keep everything tracking as smoothly as possible to get you sharp images. There's 3 ways to go about doing this. You can get a really fancy premium mount and shoot unguided. You can get an OAG, or you could get a guide scope and a guide camera. Depending on your setup, everything can be a valid option for you. Here's an example of a little mini guide scope with a guide camera. And this works well for this system, but the thing you need to be careful about when you're thinking about this decision for remote is differential flexure and guide stars. If you have a wide field telescope like this FSQ 106, then the little guide scope is more than enough to get accurate guiding with. Because this is a little guide scope, it's not going to suffer from differential flexure, where the scope will sag depending on where you're looking in the sky, and you may get good guiding numbers on your guide scope, but your images will end up being trailed. So with a nice small system like this, we can get a nice small, stably mounted guide scope and guide camera, and we're not going to have any issues. We also wouldn't have any issues on this system if we had an OAG, because it would be very stable. We'd be guiding off the light we imaged from, and we could guarantee we would get long exposures and plenty of stars because it's a wide field system. So the reason this system doesn't have an OAG is because I didn't want to deal with calculating that in the back focus. So there's a little more complexity going the OAG route, but in general, it is way better. But it depends on what works for you. If you have a system that's rigidly mounted, then a guide scope can be a great solution. Otherwise, an OAG probably be the most consistent solution for you if you're, weighing your options. That's what I would say. I'm an OAG fanboy, and if you're deciding which OAG to get, it's really just whatever one matches your camera's brand, so it's easy to adapt. So the last kind of accessory things you need to think about are anything that goes on the front end of your telescope, things like dew heaters or flat panels. Dew heaters essentially keep your lens element warm and prevent dew from forming on it. I would say in general, they're a pretty good idea to have at a remote observatory. You might gain a couple nights that you would have otherwise lost to dew. It's not a bad idea. You just need a good way to control them. Something like a Pegasus power box or a Wanderer box to let you actually have control over the temperature is a must at a remote observatory, because you don't want your dew heaters just constantly on and heating up your telescope. That's not a good situation. But apart from dew heaters, you could also think about getting something like a flip flat for your telescope. Now this is basically an automated cover that has a panel on it that illuminates your sensor, and it lets you take your flat frames at basically any time of day you want. You don't need to worry about doing sky flats. Sky flats, they work very well. They're just a little bit less flexible with your time. So these aren't strictly necessary, but they can be a fun option. So I'll go ahead and close this now. That covers basically every single component of a remote telescope. Now, what do you actually absolutely need? If you have a telescope at home and you're looking to send one out, you need it to be fully automated. So you need to be able to run your telescope in your backyard as such, hit the run button, go to sleep. Your telescope should be able to do what it needs to do without you intervening, and then wake up the next morning with a bunch of data. You'll also need a way to turn on and off your devices remotely with something like the CASA or the Digital Loggers power strip, and you're basically good to go. That's all you really need. If you're looking to buy a setup fresh, it gets a little more complicated because you need to make all of those decisions, at the moment instead of from what you already have. So to make that a little bit easier for you, I'm gonna walk around and show you a bunch of the setups at our observatory so that you can get some ideas of what people are using to maybe make you a bit more comfortable with deciding what to get. As I go between all of the setups, even the complex ones, you'll notice that all of them just boil down to these same pieces of equipment, these same categories. It's just sometimes they look a bit more complicated or bigger than another one, but they're all really the same. So let's start walking around here in building number 3. This one has a lot of big telescopes like this. This is a CDK 12.5 on an AP 1100 GTO. So a bit bigger than probably most of you would be looking to get or send, but you know, it has all of those components we've described. It's a well-running system. Here's one that is maybe a bit closer to what some of you have used before. This is an EQ6R with this T8 Edge HD, and it's got all of the exact same components and it runs pretty well. This one's got a big flat panel on it. It also has a aftermarket focuser, a Prima Luce one, a ZWO camera, and this is being run off of an Eagle PC. So another example of a setup that works. Here is my friend Curtis Morgan's setup. Again, all the same components. We've got a mount, a computer, camera, autoguider, focuser. Just depends on what the pieces are and how they look. This one has an Optec autofocuser, a very nice Moravian camera, the little mini guide scope, the Paramount Mighty. We have a Pegasus for the power cycling of some devices, a Casa for power cycling of AC devices, and then there is a little desktop PC to control everything. Here's another system, same deal. This one is freshly installed. Here's one of my systems, again, all the same components, Paramount Mighty 106. The cameras, this one's a bit different because it's got a piggyback, but I have a digital loggers down here for my power cycling, and I have a little B-Link mini PC here to control my setup. Now I've also got a little hard drive here. This is a Samsung T7 that I just have electrical taped onto my scope, and that just gives me a little bit of extra storage space for my stuff. And here you can see I got my flat panel on right now. But let's go look at some of the other setups. We'll go over here to building 4. We've got a bit more diversity of gear in here than in building 3 because this building is mostly full. Lots of other setups. Again, you're going to get the same idea of what's going on here. This is a Pleiades 111 on an AM5, an Eagle, a guide scope, flip flat, digital loggers. You know, there's no digital loggers. I actually don't know what brand their power cycling is, but yeah, pretty neat setup. This one, I would be careful with the amount of weight, especially the size of the guide scope. It looks like the mounting here is pretty rigid, but this might be coming close to the limit for an AM5. So this is something you want to think about if you're running a harmonic. Here is another system on an AM5. This one uses an ASI Air for control. And the way you do that is basically you use our VPN to run your whole system just off your phone app, as you would if you were right next to it, and you can do it remotely. So that makes things a little more simple. Again, a basic refractor, monochrome camera, neat little setup. This one right here is our friend Chuck Astrophotography's setup. He does a lot of live streaming with. It is a Rasa with a one-shot color camera and a guide scope on an EQ6R. Pretty cool. This one is using a Melee PC here that's inside of the cage on his pier. And this setup, since it's for live streaming, has a pier camera just down here that gets a really good view of the scope while it's running. Other pier cameras you can see are mounted as such on piers where each customer can get kind of an all-sky view, and they can also see where their scope is in real time. And that's really helpful for using something like an EQ6R. Here's another example. A little Meade APO. Again, little pier camera here just to verify the mount's position. Here's a cool one, a little Epsilon TubeTech camera, mini guide scope. But yeah, these are all examples of setups that work quite well at the observatory. All right, here's building 5. I'm just gonna walk around and continue to show you setups. Again, C8s, Rossas on EQ6s, lots of AM5s, lots of ASCAR refractors, CM70s, many different Red Cats, some ZWO refractors, William Optics Pleiades, tons of different setups. Here's some of our smaller mini setups back here. Aperture 75s, SV Bony, small William Optics, Red Cats. But again, all of them are, using basically the exact same loadout in terms of what they have. Again, there is a CASA, a mini PC, mount, camera, focuser, Pegasus, guider, telescope. It's really all you need. Some systems have rotators, by the way, like this Pegasus Falcon rotator. Basically lets you spin your camera around. They're neat to have, but I wouldn't say they're strictly necessary. I have rotators on some of my setups, but I honestly never use them. I just leave my camera at like a 90-degree or 0-degree pointing angle, and it looks good for most all deep sky objects. So if you're on the fence and you want to save some money, I would say don't deal with the complexity of getting one and just leave your scope at 90. All right, well that covers pretty much everything I have to say on what goes into a remote telescope. In the next sections on the series, we're going to talk about how to actually operate your remote telescope, how to automate it, how to shoot with it, how to do calibration and all that kind of fun stuff. So I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them on this YouTube channel, or you can even go to our Discord for our observatory, where we have all of our customers here active and willing to answer questions about their setups and what works for them. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll catch you in the next one.